Hi, everybody. Today is Wednesday, October 15, 2025, and our dear friend Patrick Henningsen is here with us. Welcome back, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Nima.
Please subscribe and hit like button. Help us reaching more people, and you can follow Patrick on 21st Century Wire or his Substack. Right below his name, you can see that patrickhenningsen.substack.com. Patrick, let's start with the so-called Trump's peace plan, and it was all amazing to see what has happened in Israel, what has happened in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh. And here is what Netanyahu, the understanding of Netanyahu of the whole situation with the case of Gaza.
As the war is over, but clearly the war is not over. The IDF is deployed to sections of Gaza still, and Hamas is still on the streets of Gaza. How can you say the war is over?
Well, we agreed to give peace a chance. We agreed that we should. The conditions in his 20-point plan are very clear. It's not only that we get the hostages out without getting our military out, but that we would subsequently have both demilitarization and disarmament. They're not the same thing. First, Hamas has to give up its arms. And second, you want to make sure that there are no weapons factories inside Gaza. There's no smuggling of weapons into Gaza. That's demilitarization. We agreed that that's part of the plan. And we also agreed, okay, let's get the first part done. And now let's give a chance to do the second part peacefully, which is my hope. But if not, I think I heard the president speak tonight. He said, listen, they better do it, or, how can I speak for him? He said, all hell breaks loose, okay? Well, I hope it doesn't. I hope we can do this peacefully, and we're certainly ready to do so.
Actually, Trump said if they don't disarm, we're going to do it. And you know what's amazing to me that the key point, in my opinion, is what Tom Brock said recently, that they don't have this, this word in their language, submit, how to submit. So, what can they do to force them in that direction? You have to disarm them. You have to, make everything more, you know, more directed in that aim, in that target that you're seeking for, which is the disarmament of Hamas. In order, if you're interested in peace in Gaza, you have to offer something. You have to, you give something, you get something. But that's not the case here. You're taking that.
It's not. These aren't negotiations. You're absolutely right. This is about submission, and this is the Israeli policy is total submission or death. The U.S. policy is now de facto the same as the Israeli policy, and is which the U.S. is basically going around acting as a sort of um, consigliere, as they say in the mafia, for Israel, sending messages to the Lebanese, being interlocutor, basically threatening military action, sanctions, all sorts of things. Maybe in the case of Tom Barak, he directly threatened civil war in Lebanon. He said, you have to disarm Hezbollah, and we're going to provide arms to the Lebanese military to disarm Hezbollah. He's basically openly touting now for civil war. And it's kind of good that people hear this. It's good that the world sees this. It's good for the people in the Middle East who have been trying to, I don't know, they've given the United States so much leeway for all the damage it's done to the region, still thinking that, this administration or the next administration is going to be different than the last one. And of course, now we can see the whole purpose of everything the United States does in the Middle East is for Israel. It's to protect Israel, but it's also to shield Israel from any international responsibilities or accountability that it might have as a result of what it's doing, first of all, to the native Palestinian population under an apartheid system, and secondly, slaughtering Lebanese extrajudicially just for, saying that there's a terror threat leveling whole villages in South Lebanon. They've gotten away with this as well. The United States is attacking international institutions that are trying to hold Israel accountable, like the ICC, sanctioning them, the ICJ. Who knows, how that one's going to end up. And any other countries that aren't supporting or going against Israel can expect retribution from the United States. So this is international racketeering by the Trump administration. But back to Israel. So this all Israel is doing is they're just setting up the failure of this ceasefire. This isn't a peace deal. It's not a peace. It's not even close to a peace deal. At best, it's a ceasefire. At best. And personally, just from a human being perspective, I hope it lasts as long as possible for the Palestinians. I hope they deserve to sleep at night. They deserve not to be bombed in their tents. They deserve to eat. They deserve to have water, to food, medical care. They deserve to have hospitals that aren't being bombed. Okay, and just the fact that Israel is allowed, between 500 and 600 trucks, lorries, or as they call it in Britain, or semi trucks, into the Gaza Strip with aid, is a tacit admission that they have been running a siege and a blockade now for 2 years. I mean, in total for going on 17 or 18 years, but in the last 2 years. So they have been starving the Palestinians. They have been withholding essential things for living, like food, water, and medical supplies, cutting off electricity and so forth, in addition to bombing them, flattening Gaza. So I'm happy for the Palestinians. They deserve as much respite as they can get, and I hope it lasts forever, quite frankly. However, I'm not going to celebrate because I'm skeptical, because so Israel and Trump has adopted the Israeli tactic, which is to pretend to table a deal that is unworkable, where the other side really doesn't have any say in it, call it a deal when it's not a deal, it's an order. And if the other side doesn't comply, or if Israel breaks the ceasefire, which they have done every single time before, every single time, if they break it, then and something happens, or there's someone shoots back at an Israeli position, or a rocket, a glorified Roman candle lands in, on the Israeli side, then they say, oh, look, we gave them a chance for peace, and we don't have a partner to negotiate with. Yeah, because you killed them all. You assassinated all the Hamas negotiators. Or you put them in prison, like Marwan Barghouti, any kind of unifying political figure. So they've rigged it at every single angle so that there can't be any sort of bilateral understanding. There can't be, any kind of workable long-term peace agreement. And then they blame the Palestinians. What Trump will do, see, Trump is not serious. He's not a serious enough person, and he's surrounded himself with TV presenters, grifters, and con artists in his cabinet, all of which, every single one of these con artists, grifters, and Fox News presenters, all of them were handpicked by the Israeli lobby. Anybody who touches national security or touches foreign policy was handpicked by Mary Madelson and Benjamin Netanyahu's office. Okay, every single one. So within that talent pool of no talent, they're talented in looking after themselves. These people, these are con artists, they're scamsters, they're professional liars, and they do not have the ability to construct a framework that has everybody's interests in mind. That's what a peace deal looks like. There will be no peace deal from the Trump administration. And then if anything goes wrong or breaks down, he will then blame the party that he believes or perceives to be his, quote, enemy, i.e., it'll be the Palestinians, even if it's blatantly Israel's fault and the United States' fault. I mean, it's so disingenuous. Israel's stated policy is no Palestinian state. And so Trump did not even mention, not in Sharm el Sheikh, not at that gaudy display in the Israeli parliament. It's just a humiliation for the United States. What the performance, it was like Don Rickles and Dean Martin's celebrity roast. It was embarrassing. But Trump doesn't have any shame at that level. He's there, made a few quips with Mary Madelson that could be construed as somewhat borderline. But at the end of the day, he is dancing. He is dancing to the tune of the piper that paid him. And that piper is the Israeli lobby. They own him. They don't, and he basically, his son-in-law is the one running point on most of this, as well as his real estate associates like Steve Witkoff. These are not diplomats. So he didn't acknowledge that there was a genocide in Gaza, and he didn't acknowledge a Palestinian statehood. Even if all of these countries, including NATO members, had formally recognized a Palestinian state probably for quite precarious reasons, mind you, Britain and France and so forth, there was a strategic. Nonetheless, it's on the table, and most UN members will have voted for that or recognize that in the General Assembly. Not a mention. That means there'll be no peace. There'll be no peace deal, not with Trump in office, and not with the current regime in Tel Aviv. So they will just resume the bombing after they get all of their hostages back or enough of them back. It doesn't matter. They're going to if they get all of them back, they will resume the bombing. If they disarm the Palestinians, they'll say they haven't disarmed them enough, and they'll keep attacking. And if they get some of the hostages back, or they're POWs at this point, because many of them are, the ones left are reservists. So these are POWs. I mean, here's the other thing, is how this is framed. Israel says this is war. Trump said Bibi has been a great wartime president. This is not a war. Just the fact that it's being referred to by our mainstream media as the war in Gaza, or it's being referred to by Trump as a war, or by the Israelis as a war. They want to frame it as a war and not what it actually is, because that means that they can exercise extrajudicial powers and act with extreme prejudice. That's why they frame it as a war on terror. That's how they're framing it. You can suspend all international norms, all international law, all of it, if it's a war on terror. So Israel labels a Palestinian armed resistance as terrorists, then they lobby Washington, London, and Paris, and Berlin, and Brussels to do the same. And then suddenly, it's a war on terror. We have a coalition of the willing, and Israel is the point person in this, noble crusade against terrorism, when in fact, under international law, Palestine, the Palestinians, as an occupied people, have a right under international law and multiple treaties and conventions to have an armed liberation struggle. And that's what's going on in Gaza. It's not an expeditionary terrorist organization, Hamas, not by any definition historically, but the bar has been lowered to such a degree on this elastic term that's completely loaded, and in Israel's case, front loaded, in order for it to achieve its territorial ambitions. So, I mean, it's so easy to pick this apart, but it's sad that there's so many people in the media and politics that have submitted to this grand fairy tale that somehow Israel's just defending itself. I mean, it's beyond audacious. I mean, we've never seen anything like this in history. Never. Not at least in the modern era, when we've had a global media able to disseminate these issues in real time. The level of lies, of deception, of the intellectual corruption that we're dealing with here is unprecedented. It's unprecedented. How are we going to deal with this? Really, with the current political leadership in these countries, it does not look like they're going to be capable of doing the right thing at the end of the day. And that's really what this is all about. If they talk a lot about Western democracy, Western civilization, well, Western civilization and democracy and post-Enlightenment post-Westphalian nation states, the age of rationality is based on what is right and what is moral. These are common values, common definitions. These were codified after the Second World War in a number of treaties and international agreements and conventions. That's what it was for. And the US led that process. And now the US is tearing it apart. Interesting.
Yeah. Patrick, here is what Smotrich said. He says that we will establish Jewish settlement in Gaza because settlements provide security. So they wanted to say, is that the same plan as they did it in the West Bank? Because the West Bank, if you look at the West Bank, there is no West Bank anymore.
No.
And the same plan goes to Gaza. And with the disarmament of Hamas, that would be fully achievable, in my opinion, if they go in that direction.
It would. And it's good of you to point that out, Nima, because there is no more West Bank. Not the West Bank as it was previously defined physically does not exist anymore. It's been effectively partitioned, and then within each partition, it's been subdivided into smaller pieces. And then Israel's effectively cordoned off the areas, in which it will eventually absorb and annex. So they've isolated East Jerusalem. They've segregated the West Bank and the Jordan Valley, and so they're in control. And so they're attempting to exert the same kind of control in Gaza. And I say if they allow any Palestinians to live there in the medium term, the long-term plan is very clear. It's full extermination or ethnic cleansing of the native Palestinian population, all of them. All of them. They might have some reservations, which they could construct in the Negev desert in order to keep them in, tent cities and sort of build more new and isolated refugee camps or concentration camps or whatever they have in mind, until such a time where they could kill off whoever has been, herded out into some sort of holding zone temporarily for 1 or 2 years, or kill them or push them into, in the case of the West Bank. I'm sure the long-term plan is to create another upheaval there, similar to Gaza, that would effectively push, and I think they would be able to push the Palestinian population into Jordan. Not least of all because there already is a large Palestinian population in Jordan. Now, it would mean the end of the royal family, or at least this the current king, because it would be seen as a catastrophic failure of his leadership. But nonetheless, Jordan, actually the West would love that in a way, because they would then install a technocratic government. Britain and the United States will probably already have people lined up for post King Abdullah Jordan. I'm sure there's contingency plans for this, and Saudi Arabia might also play a role in this. Perhaps they do have a territorial dispute with Jordan, which is, by some people's account, unresolved over history. But for Egypt, they don't have that sort of luxury. The Egyptian government does not want to inherit that type of a problem. And so Israel's plan then, Smotrich, Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, and all these other, far-right lunatics, genocidal lunatics, their plan is to push enough Palestinians into the Sinai desert. And then they've already started floating the point of claiming that Hamas has gotten into Egypt under the camouflage of Palestinian medical evacuees and people fleeing Gaza, and thereby creating a repeat of the 1978 scenario, whereby Israel would say that they're justified in attacking South Lebanon, as they did in 78, and then invading and occupying South Lebanon as a buffer zone because of terrorists, because the PLO was there, you see. And it's the exact same scenario they could easily reconstruct with regards to what's left of Gaza and the Sinai Desert. What's Egypt going to do if Israel launched an airstrike and took out some Egyptian soldiers or whatever? Then they're going to do nothing. They're going to do nothing because they know the United States will not restrain Israel. See, this is what everybody in the region knows now. They know, even the Gulf Arabs know this. The Gulf Arabs know that Israel can strike them for whatever reason. And when you see Hamas delegates, negotiators in Egypt, you got to be concerned about this because they were in Qatar at the insistence of the Israelis and the Americans, and suddenly the narrative changes, and Israel mounts military airstrikes against the Qataris. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So it just gives Israel an excuse to hover around and attack different people in the region, to exert its authority, and ultimately that is what the Greater Israel Project is. It's to have Israel at the core, surrounded by all client states that are subservient to Israel and their orders, with the backing of the United States, like the big bully standing with a giant club standing behind the little bully in the front. But Israel's not a little bully. They have an unfair advantage over everybody in that they are a nuclear armed state. So, I mean, that's the issue. And the issue with Iran is Iran's the only country in the region that that is willing to stand up to that, and it could possibly hold Israel accountable. But that could change. That could also change.
Can we say that Turkey, because before all of these madness starting, I thought that the two countries, important countries in the region, are Iran and Turkey. But you see, as time goes by, Turkey is somehow disappearing from the scene. You know, they're part of the plan, and you don't see any sort of objection on their part. What is going on with Turkey under Erdogan?
I think from an Islam, with Turkey, the issue is this: it's from an Islamic point of view. I think rhetorically, the government in Turkey needs to be seen to be taking, at least saying the right moral rhetoric from an Islamic point of view, as part of the Ummah. If Turkey wants to be regarded as, either the successor or the sort of co-steward, if you will, of the Islamic world with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, then they have to say and appear to be doing the right things. At the end of the day, however, Turkey does not have a fraternal bond with Arabs. They don't. The only thing they have in common is the Islamic bond. And we shouldn't. Although Hamas is a Islamic movement, the Palestinian issue shouldn't be seen through a religious lens, but that's the lens that Israel and the U.S. want to portray it as. But traditionally, this has been through a secular lens, through an international legal lens, and through a lens of self-determination, through the lens of the UN Charter, Article 1, or Article 51, depending on if you want to talk about self-defense or you want to talk about the self-determination. That's the lens that this issue has been traditionally framed, and in my argument, it's correctly framed in that direction. But it shouldn't be. If you frame it through a religious lens, all Palestinians are not Muslims, and they're not all one sect of Islam either. Although probably majority Sunni, but there is a very strong Christian contingent and tradition in occupied Palestine as well. And of course, the U.S. was very keen to downplay that because they don't want to raise the concerns of Christians in America or in Europe to think that they have some common cause with the Palestinians. It's clear how the media just avoids this issue, and that you can ask why that is. I think it has to do with incredible editorial influence over academia, media, and politics in America with the Israeli lobby. But put that aside. With back to Turkey. So Turkey has no, in their eyes, they don't have any skin in the game with Arabs, and this harkens back to the separation with the Ottoman Empire. And if you think about how Israel came into existence, the state of Israel, as it's referred to, came into existence after the First World War, and it was only because the British and the French were determined to achieve regime change with the Ottoman Empire, because they were allied with Germany, plain and simple. And there was an economic motivation there, which was uh, the Britain wanted to keep the oil in the Iraqi oil field specifically out of the hands of the Germans as a starting point. And so they promised the Arabs that they would have their own independent state if they joined the British and the French to defeat the Ottomans. And of course, they did defeat them. And then Britain and France turned around and stabbed the Arabs in the back. They lied to them. They presented a sort of questionable Hashemite dynasty to rule over the eastern portion there. And then in terms of Palestine, which should have gone in, either become Greater Syria or would have become an independent Arab state, they handed that to, after the Balfour Declaration, that was already set in stone. They handed it to as a future Jewish homeland, the Zionist entity, as it's referred to by many people in the world today. So it was that betrayal of the Arabs by the European powers in order to defeat the Ottomans. So as far as Turkey is concerned, it's Turkey's main objectives are to look after its own immediate interests, which are it wants to secure parts of Syria, eventually absorb them into Turkey, and it wants to benefit from any kind of a trans-regional pipeline project as a transit nation. And that's from an economic point of view, and to give itself leverage. So it does have preference over which of those energy plans becomes the final plan, whether it's the Qatari via Syria and Turkey, that route. There's other routes as well. Israel wants to be a beneficiary as well of that, becoming an energy hub or a place where, a conversion hub, financial hubs. Turkey has designs in the future for this, but in terms of actually putting anything on the line for the Palestinians, Turkey's done nothing. Activists have in Turkey, people have put themselves in the line of fire with the previous flotillas from 2010 and so forth. And the Turkish people are very passionate on this issue, but the government's not willing to do anything. In fact, the government helped to put in power probably Israel's greatest, coup de grace, which was installing HTS in Damascus. That was purely for the benefit of Israel. And Turkey played the key role for the entire process from 2011 until Damascus fell 1 year ago. Turkey did that. So Turkey was carrying water for the Zionist project, for Greater Israel. In fact, in Jordan was too. It allowed itself to be a staging ground for the destabilization of Syria, especially from 2011 until probably 2015, those key years. But Turkey, from 2010 right up to, till Damascus fell. And they're still bolstering the Jolani regime. To the benefit of who? To the benefit of Israel, to the benefit of the United States, and nobody else. And they're hoping to get what? What's Turkey hoping to get from it? They've stolen everything they can from Syria. Now they just want to maybe absorb part of the Afrin, Aleppo, Jarbulus, and maybe perhaps on the coastal region a little bit more territory. I'm sure they would love it, because they view this as Turkey, as their historic, like the Hatay province. That's Syria, but it was absorbed by Turkey in the early 20th century, and it's clearly Syria. So they're not finished with their acquisitions, and then there's the Kurdish issue, which is, to me, a massive red herring that has been allowed to become a negotiation piece purely because of the support of the United States and the British. But that's a separate issue we can talk about.
Looking at the summit in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, it was amazing, Patrick, seeing these people gathering. You know, we have a genocide in Gaza, and these people are just talking. You look in the Indonesian president talking with Donald Trump about their business. You see I don't know if it's the president or prime minister of Pakistan talking about, how Donald Trump is great. He has to achieve, the Nobel Peace Prize, praising him just for 5 minutes talking about this. And, the only issue that wasn't, in my opinion, discussed was what is the solution for Gaza? What is really going on there? It's a political game for all of them. They're benefiting from these summits, but there is no point with these summits, as we saw with the case of Ukraine as well. I would make the same argument. But with the case of Gaza, it's much more important because there is a genocide. And we have to be more cautious about what's going on there. But you mentioned Erdogan. How about Pakistan? How about other countries? How about Egypt? So this is so deep. We have to understand that. I think for the same reason, look at the behavior of Iranian government. They have decided not to participate in it because what is the point after all?
I'm glad the Iranians didn't go to that meeting. I think that they, it showed that they have boundaries on this. At least from a political point of view, that's the least they can do, and I'm glad they did. And it really separates them from some of those other, second-tier powers pining for regional relevance and power, like Turkey and Egypt. And what it serves, what Sharm el-Sheikh was about, was a photo op, and that's photo ops are the currency that runs the Trump administration. That Donald Trump, his political machine is fueled by photo ops. It's fueled by photo ops, signing ceremonies, and victory laps. And he doesn't care if it falls apart on Monday. He doesn't care, because he'll move on to the next thing. This president is so adept at dominating the media cycle that there's no substance that's ever required. The media is never demanding substance because he's got them running around in circles. And you know what? He's also got all these leaders running around in circles. They know they have to go to Sharm el-Sheikh and sort of give patronage to the Don, as it were, the mafia boss, because they know at least if they suck up to him a little bit in public, that the U.S. might not punish them too much, because they could be punished through tariffs, through sanctions, through demands of regime change. The U.S. can start a proxy war. If the country is against the United States or is not cooperating with the United States, to have their leadership taken out. Donald Trump can intervene into the judiciary system of a country and say, stop that prosecution. That person needs to be prosecuted. I mean, that's where he is right now. Look at what he did in Israel. I mean, it's literally like telling there should be a pardon of Netanyahu right in front of the world, and to forget about what Israeli citizens think about it. It doesn't even come into the picture. He may or may not get his way there, but so that's what it's all about. There's zero substance to any of it. This is literally power politics. It's about intimidation, racketeering, protection rackets, protection money, i.e., promises of investment in the U.S. or promises of allowing the United States back in. So it's kind of like the neo-colonial era that Trump is attempting to rekindle is what he's doing here. I mean, the Pakistan situation right now is mind-boggling. What the Trump administration is attempting to open up there and in Afghanistan as a new front, again, to restart the global war on terror, but also to reposition the United States in order to block China's Belt and Road Initiative, and also to, I think, in a sense, also send a message to India and the BRICS countries that the United States is going to impose itself right in the middle of not just their economic affairs, but their geopolitical affairs physically. That's what's happening around Afghanistan and Pakistan right now. That has huge implications, considering the U.S. used to occupy Afghanistan for 25 years under the flimsy banner of NATO, which is a joke. But that they had a firm foothold in Central Asia after 9/11, which is significant, and it's gone, and they could easily get it back. And Donald Trump has even signaled, I think, in the last week, that he believes, or he's seen a plan for the United States to reoccupy Bagram Air Force Base. I mean, do you know what this entails? I mean, we can talk about that, but it just goes to show you they're quite happy to have multiple plates in the air. Now, I think the ceasefire in Gaza, one of the benefits it gives Trump short term is it allows Washington to refocus on the Central Asian project, which is also about not just about containing China economically and geopolitically, but also gaining more leverage in an attack on Iran. Because imagine the last, imagine what the United States did back in June, to the end of the so-called 12-day war with Israel and Iran. The United States came in. Now imagine if they had full occupation of Afghanistan, how easy that operation would have been. Well, it would have also opened them up to potential strikes, obviously from Iranian missiles. But from covert operations, launching covert operations out of Afghanistan. I mean, if you're occupying the country and you've got, a couple 100,000 troops there, or, 50,000 or whatever they had, 80,000. I mean, that's significant resources there. So I think they'd like to, they'd like to reinsert themselves there. They'd like to have a base in Pakistan on the Arabian Sea or on the coast somewhere. The United States would like to have a bigger military footprint in Central Asia. Now think about this for a moment. Where are we heading now? We're going back to the Cold War, in terms of geopolitics. It's much more complex though now, because you have multiple actors and a lot of sovereign states that you have to deal with and to make deals with. And in the case of the Pakistan question, again, we could discuss it further, but U.S. is quite keen to punish India for its insubordination economically. And that's part of what I think the Trump administration is trying to leverage that situation. And in doing so, they're able to achieve a lot of the geopolitical objectives, like putting pressure on Russia's, quote, soft underbelly once again, and breaking up trying to break up the alliance, economic alliance between China and Pakistan. But it's going to be a tall order. China has a lot sunk into Pakistan in terms of investments. But having said that, China had a lot sunk into Libya, didn't they? Before NATO took Libya down. And China had a lot sunk into Sudan before the CIA effectively created a civil war to partition Sudan. So the U.S. has a very good record of sowing destabilization in order to repel or to contain or push China back. And they believe they've succeeded in doing that in parts of Africa. And I think they're wanting to do that, I think, in Central Asia as well, at least try to.
I think Pakistan is a very interesting player, that because you see the Chinese influence, you see the American influence in the country. You see their friendship with Iran. They're sort of, just somehow it's always a question mark for me. What
Mhm.
is the nature of this relationship? But they feel somehow so close to each other. And yesterday we had the American drones going to Afghanistan from Pakistan, gathering information, in the southern part of Iran. There is a lot going on, but how what is the coming, what is the outcome of these different vectors in Pakistan? What's your understanding of Pakistan? Who's going to make the final decision in Pakistan, and who has the ultimate leverage?
I think there's there's an inherent political instability that's kind of baked into Pakistan's political economy that I think external actors like the U.S. has been able to exploit. And then as an institution, the military still has, effective control over a lot of the important nodes of the country, maybe not to the same degree as SCAF does in Egypt, for instance, or uh, President Musharraf had previously when he was, installed by the U.S. as the president of Pakistan for a number of years. But there, it is, I think, vulnerable to manipulation in that respect. And what I think is brewing right now is a proxy war, a new proxy war in Afghanistan. And then on one side you have Russia. They have their interests. Obviously, they have interest in a stable border with the former, Soviet states and CIS states. Tajikistan being an example. The government there is cooperating with Moscow, but on by the same token, the for instance, Pakistan has been hosting, if I'm to my knowledge, I'm pretty sure Pakistan's been hosting the Afghan opposition in Pakistan. So that's a big signal there. And India has, kind of has detente with Afghanistan. They have a historic border dispute, which has been put on the rocks for the moment. And so there's good relations between India and Afghanistan. So that's you have India and Russia on one side, China on that side as well. And then you have the United States, Pakistan, and maybe if Israel. Don't think that Israel is not centrally involved in the Pakistani issue, because ultimately that's the only nuclear armed Islamic country, and also that is somewhat, as you said, Nima, allied with Iran, has some deep ties to Iran on many levels, for sure. Um, but then Iran also sits on that side with Russia, China, and possibly indirectly India in that sense. But although India's interests are different, so but it has all the makings of uh, a proxy battle pitch, and a civil war could be created there, or instability. They could drag in the Iranians, for instance. That would be easy to possibly drag the Russians in, although I don't think they'll fall for that so easily. But it's amazing that even after all these years, after 150, 200 years, Afghanistan's still key pivot point for the control and domination of the Eurasian landmass. So the British Empire, more or less, in a different iteration with different, technologies and different ways of trade, but ultimately it was about, at least my interpretation of the Great Game 1.0 was really about keeping the Russian Empire and India from establishing any kind of real ties, and keeping segregating it so that they would maintain power of the sea trade routes, which the U.S. eventually inherited that sort of mantle as a global maritime enforcer and power and so forth. But still, not much has changed. Not much has changed from Halford Mackinder's World Island and Zbigniew Brzezinski's Grand Chessboard, which is quite extraordinary. But are we just stupid enough to fight another war? Or, for the U.S., it's their one false flag. They could easily restart Afghanistan as the global boogeyman with even a minor false flag attack, against a U.S. base somewhere like, USS Cole type kind of theatrical performance, or something on U.S. soil, or something, or hitting U.S. interests or something. It's very easy. And then the U.S. media machine and the Trump administration would just go into the overdrive at that point. And, and then inertia would take care of the rest. Next thing you know, we wake up to a totally different geopolitical landscape the following week. That's not that difficult to do with this current administration. I would say the Trump administration is right on path to being the biggest neocon administration ever.
Exactly.
They're
Yeah.
right there. They're right there. The only difference is they haven't done a big score yet, that like the Bush administration did. But the foreign policy is worse. The rhetoric is worse. All of the lapsed agreements, plus all the lapsed Cold War agreements with Russia. I mean, all these things all the guardrails are off. There are a lot more guardrails in place during the Bush administration, although they acted unilaterally against Iraq with a fake coalition of the willing with the British and a few like Polish troops and whatever. It was a unilateral action, but there were guardrails around in place in the international system, and they're gone now. So I mean, arguably it's a lot more dangerous now, with an ascendant neocon movement in Washington. And again, I have to go back to this. You cannot talk about anything in Pakistan or Central Asia and disassociate that with Iran, regime change in Iran, regime change in Afghanistan for sure, but the ultimate goal is regime change in Iran. And
I think we had regime change in Pakistan. Imran Khan.
sorry, no, I mean Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Afghanistan. But yeah, and Pakistan, they've achieved that. So Pakistan is central to and Israel's intimated this in recent speeches and comments by Netanyahu. This is a major priority. This is part of Israel's grand chessboard. The Greater Israel Project will not be secure without the subduing and disarmament of Pakistan as a nuclear state, and the regime change of Iran. They can never be fully safe to expand in what they believe is the Greater Israel Project. And the United States' job is to facilitate that. Because at the end of the day, the Trump administration is fully owned and operated by Israeli interests. It used to be the West used Israel, the British and the Americans used it as their colonial beachhead and enforcer, and they still do to some degree. I mean, so Israel still performs destabilization activities and violence in the region, which benefits U.S. or Anglo-American imperial objectives still. But the balance has shifted tremendously, especially in the last 20 years, whereby there's no real agency left in the U.S. political system, to the point where you have a foreign government appointing every single cabinet pick. How else can you explain how a mediocre reservist who attained the rank of major, who was a weekend Fox News host, who not even an anchor, fairly insignificant figure on a U.S. cable network, becomes the head of the Department of Defense, the head of a $1 trillion a year Pentagon, Pete Hegseth. He was handpicked by the Israeli lobby. I mean, if you had to rank the resumes or CVs of the qualified candidates in the United States living, Pete Hegseth, if you you could probably place 100,000 resumes above Pete Hegseth. He'd be at the bottom of a pile of about 100,000. That's how unqualified and undeserving that person is to be doing this job. And you can tell by his performance. It's all bluster, all show. He's talking about like the weight of generals and need to get on fitness programs. I mean, it's a joke. I mean, it's sunk so far below the dignity of that office, if whatever it used to be. But I could say the same thing about the presidency now. You know, it's very dishonorable what has been done and said by this U.S. president and a lot of these minions working for him. And I'm going to say minions, and it's not a pejorative. Donald Trump has surrounded himself with people that are completely subservient to him intellectually. That means they can't say anything publicly or act in any way that might either upstage him or show him to be saying something untruthful. So you have a Secretary of State with no independence who basically shuffles around like he's Trump's butler. I mean, it's Manuel from Faulty Towers. Marco Rubio is Manuel from Faulty Towers. Basically, if you know that British comedy with John Cleese, the classic show, that's who Marco Rubio is. He was selected by the Israeli lobby, so they yanked him out of his safe seat in Florida in the Senate. And that's another thing. Israel doesn't care if the Republicans lose the House or Senate. They don't care, but they've convinced that MAGA's gone along with this charade because they think that the Zionist lobby cares about the Republican Party and conservatism and anti-wokeism and all this. They don't. If they cared about the Republican Party, they wouldn't have yanked so many Republicans out of safe House seats and so many Republicans out of safe Senate seats, including Matt Gaetz, which they yanked out of his floor. He would have been the future Speaker of the House. At some point, Matt Gaetz, in the next 4 or 5 years, would be Speaker of the House. They coaxed him out of his a very strong seat in Florida, and he's very independent. He's very popular with his constituency. They coaxed him out by making a fake offer that he would be Attorney General. And then as soon as that offer was made and he kind of half withdrew from his House seat, they then floated up an old sex scandal that had already been put to bed and then forced him somehow to withdraw his Attorney General position or desire to take that office, and then put pressure on the Trump administration to announce a replacement, Pam Bondi, who's covering up the Epstein files. Interesting how that worked out. And so they managed to pull one of the strongest young maverick Republicans out of politics. And he was the only one that stood up against some of the crazy pro-Israeli legislation, including an anti-Semitism bill that was pushed out by the Republicans just 2 years ago. Think about this. So the level of manipulation by Israel into U.S. politics, literally they're manipulating the machinery of U.S. politics, is unprecedented, and it's being done so blatantly obvious. But what I'm telling you is public knowledge, but it would never rise to the level of headline of any U.S. publication because they're all terrified about telling the truth. So Israel, the lobby has transformed the U.S., the personality, the face of the U.S. political system. In much the same way, they have transformed the British political system. They took the labor leader out. The most popular labor leader of the generation was Jeremy Corbyn. They not only took him out of the labor leadership and the future prime ministership, they got him kicked out of his party that he'd been serving for his whole career. And everybody else who was his ally also got purged. And they did it on a fake anti-Semitism kind of campaign, and all this scaremongering about changing foreign policy would be bad for the Five Eyes Alliance and all this other stuff. But a big driver of that, as was revealed in the 2-part Al Jazeera documentary called The Lobby. So, I mean, there's receipts for all this. These aren't secrets, but it's being done so openly. The only people who know about it or acknowledge it are journalists that are objective and commentators who are actually objective and don't mind just telling the truth of what's right in front of their eyes. But mainstream newspapers and network television will not touch any of this stuff. So what I'm saying here, the bottom line, Nima, is there's the balance. It used to be a quid pro quo. Israel would perform duties that serve the objectives of the Western imperial interests. And in return, the Western imperial interests would allow Israel to pursue its Greater Israel project. That was a quid pro quo. And I think there was some balance to this for a period of decades. But in recent decades, that scale, that balance has tipped so heavily in the interests of the Israelis that now the West have allowed, in order to protect Israel, they're allowing Israel to demolish all of international institutions, to undermine and ultimately probably kill the United Nations, to undermine international justice system, international law, the ICC, the ICJ, the Geneva Convention, the Human Rights Convention, the Genocide Convention, and I can go on and on and on. And then domestically, to undermine the right for free speech, the right for freedom of assembly by attacking people who are protesting an ongoing genocide, all to protect Israel, all to and to sacrifice good relations with Arab countries, with Muslim countries, with other countries, threatening countries that are defending Palestine, with tariffs and all sorts of other things, Venezuela, Colombia, South Africa, as an example. All of this, destroy good relations with so many international partners. Why? All for one reason: to defend this tiny little country in the Middle East that used to provide an Anglo-American foothold to help control Eurasia, but now has become a massive liability for Western imperial interests. So what are they going to do now? We're at a major crossroads in history right now. And Israel is at a major existential crossroads as well. While they have achieved their objectives of expanding the greater Israel catchment area, if you will, they have also destroyed their brand internationally in the process. And they will never recover the brand cachet and legitimacy that they once enjoyed. That's the paradox. And that's the crossroads we're at right now. What's going to happen next? That's the big question.
I think that question could be addressed by the situation in Iran and Pakistan, because the two main enemies of Israel right now in that region are these two countries. And we had the Prime Minister of Israel talking about Pakistan, how great, they're, and they can start with the disarmament of Pakistan in terms of nuclear weapons, and let's go after that. Or, this the same game. And what they did to Pakistan in terms of Imran Khan.
Mm.
It's tragic. It's tragic what has happened in Pakistan. And I don't know what are these, vectors, political vectors in Pakistan, how they can, because traditionally there is a strong link between Iran and Pakistan because of the language, because of the culture. They have a strong ties.
Mm.
But when it comes to these political games inside Pakistan, it's much more complex. They have, Imran Khan, in my opinion, Imran Khan was not that much of friend of Iran, Russia, China, or the United States. He wanted something good for Pakistan as a country to be independent. That will was removed from power in Pakistan. That is the main concern, in my opinion. Dealing with nuclear weapons, disarmament of Pakistan, how they can influence Pakistan, weaken Pakistan. That would be the future. That would be because with the case of Iran, Patrick, I think we are at at a step at a level that we can say the Iran can defend itself against any plan on the part of the United States and Israel to attack them. But in Pakistan, it's much more complex, the situation, to understand it.
I think the biggest thing about Pakistan is on the Imran Khan issue is that in Imran Khan, you had a clear break from previous heads of state in Pakistan. They had been in a sort of, uh, military dictatorships, effectively, or U.S. appointed military administrators, if you will. And to it from a U.S. point of view, they would want the person in power to be more or less their proxy in interfacing with the Pakistani military-industrial complex, first and foremost. And Imran Khan represented a populist politician. So what a populist politician can do, especially in Asia, is galvanize the public, capture the public imagination. And the other important thing, not just relations with Iran, but with Imran Khan, good relations with India. And there you saw the beginning of the massive diffusion of 60, 70 years of tension between India and Pakistan, two nuclear armed states. Now, so that's one major nuclear flashpoint on the planet that would effectively be under control, neutralized, and perhaps ultimately eliminated with some grand treaty or agreement resolving historic differences. And that was happening and would have happened probably under Imran Khan. And he would have probably become at that point a leader in the BRICS movement, I would think. And then you have a major change in the balance of power in Asia. And
Yeah.
if he's then allied with Russia and China, again, and India wouldn't not benefit from this. Of course, they'd benefit massively from this. Everybody would. So that signified a trend of the geopolitical center of gravity shifting eastward, continuing to shift eastward, which is its natural drift with development in the east. So this horrified Washington. This is unacceptable. They can't do that. So the British and the Americans, with the help of Israel, their prime objective is to pull the center of gravity back west. It's simple. So they don't have full spectrum dominance over maritime trade routes and a monopoly on global trade and commerce as they once did in the past. But so they're trying to compensate of that from that loss of that position of hegemony by sabotaging, by disrupting, by destroying. And so they believe that by arresting the development of the East, that can be construed as a win for the West and would maintain Western, quote, civilization, like whatever that means these days, but Western civilization, their ruling epoch, if you will just extend it. So it's a zero-sum game of geopolitics. It's a zero-sum game. This is where we're at. And the problem with zero-sum games is, and the Cold War, there was an ideological component to it, which helped to both balance it, but to give it some meaning in a political context, or from the communist side or the left-wing side, the class warfare, class consciousness, and so forth, inequality, social justice, these sort of issues were prime, on that side of the conversation of the Cold War divide. And on the Western side, it was about liberal democracy. It was about free markets. It was about opportunity and deregulation, freedom, and so forth. But this one doesn't have any of those components in it. This is zero sum power politics. This is winding back the clock to pre-1914. That's what this is. And so and we're seeing that reflected in Ukraine vis-a-vis Europe and NATO attitudes and rhetoric. And we're seeing that with the United States, with Israel, and the behavior of the Western countries again, the U.S. behavior against Venezuela most recently. I mean, just talking about attacking and invading a South American country and making up this, you know, fairy tale that it's a narco state. I mean, suddenly became a narco state, Venezuela. So just a total lie. And so it's a bit chaotic. At least with the Cold War, you had the West would make the ideological argument, and they could scare their populations to a degree about the fear of communist infiltration and the Red Scare and all this stuff. And that kind of worked. And it worked on the communist side as well, because American aggression and Western aggression, nuclear buildup in Europe was sold to populations in the East. Is look, there's actual evidence here that they are threatening. They want to wipe us off the planet. And so that helped to, I think, fuel that side of the ideological divide for sure. But now, what is this about? At the end of the day, the democracy thing is this is what they're doing in Afghanistan. The United States, Trump is restarting, the liberal democracy argument that we need to bring democracy to Afghanistan. Pretty soon, Trump's going to be saying we need to bring women's rights. Trump's going to go woke pretty soon. Need to do it for the women.
Amazing. Yeah. But by the way, he's doing totally the opposite in the United States.
Well, this is what the right do. The right do. The argument the right in America make, it's hilarious to watch all these charlatans on Fox News and all these sort of self-described conservatives in America. They're saying, "Oh, we're against the woke," and Elon Musk is the same. "Oh, against the LGBT, we're against the woke," da 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 da. And then when they're supporting Israel, they're saying, "Well, we need to, Hamas needs to be eliminated because they're not supporting gay rights in Gaza, or Iran needs to be." We need regime change in Iran because they're making the women cover their head. So they evoke sort of feminist thematics in order to as window dressing for their imperial machinations. And they do it in the Islamic world all the time. These people don't care about anyone's rights in Iran or the Middle East. It's just they're doing the right, the fake conservatives in the West do exactly the same thing that their bleeding heart liberal adversaries did for years. NATO used to run ads in America and bus stops with Taliban women wearing a full burqa, light blue burqa, and say, "NATO, keep the progress going. We're going to get these women's rights back, so we need to keep bombing Afghanistan." They ran these ads on U.S. billboards in places like Chicago. We've documented this on our website at the time. And that was how they sold the war. That's how Hillary Clinton sold it. That's how Obama sold it. And this is how the right sell it as well. Exactly the same thing. They use the exact same stupid tools, cheap imperial flimsy tools that their left-wing or supposed left-wing, they're both neo-colonial endeavors at the end of the day. It's just like the sign on the door says right, the sign on the door says left. They're both pursuing identical foreign policies and using the exact same tools to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Patrick, for being with us today. Great pleasure talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you, Nima.
And see you soon, Patrick.